One of my favorite genres is the survival horror genre, but under that category, one of my favorite series is the Resident Evil series. And don't get me wrong, there's some games that veer more towards action and less than they do survival horror. But in particular, many of those games to me are the golden standard for great horror video games. But one entry in particular that stands out above all of the titles, even now, is the Resident Evil Remake. And that game to me holds a special place in my heart because I played it right when it came out. And over the years, I've repurchased it digitally, physical copies. I even have a newer copy for it on my Switch. And the reason I keep going back to that game is because, to me, it's the shining example of what a good survival horror game should be. And the game does so much right that I look at it, in my opinion, as probably one of the greatest survival horror games ever made. So in this video, I'm going to kind of go over what I really think makes that game special and why I recommend, if you've never checked it out, that you should give it a chance on many of the different digital stores or even buy an older physical copy. So let's take a look. The first time I played the original Resident Evil game was back on the PS1, around when I was 10 years old. Me and my friend ended up conning his mom into letting us play it, and we ended up beating it over a weekend. And at that time, don't get me wrong, the game had some scary elements, but even my 10-year-old self found it a little too cheesy to think that it was, the scariest game ever made, like some people had stated. And we ended up getting into Resident Evil 2, even Resident Evil 3, but I myself enjoyed the general puzzles and the atmosphere of those games, and that was something that I was excited to play more of as I got a little older. And then you fast forward to 2002, and Resident Evil Remake ends up releasing on the Gamecube. Now, at that time, it's not like the current console generation where you see the Xbox One and then the Series X, and there's not this fundamental gargantuan leap in both graphics and gameplay. But at the time between that N64 to GameCube era, it seemed like gaming had taken a monumental leap. And what we ended up seeing was a lot of really high quality games coming out to that GameCube, Xbox, PS2 generation of consoles. And so when I saw that Capcom at the time was remaking the original Resident Evil on this modern, at the time, hardware, I was completely excited. I was thinking to myself, this is going to be something truly different and special from the original. Because don't get me wrong, the original game was a great product of its time, and it did do its best to maximize the PS1 hardware. And in a lot of ways, it set a trend or a blueprint for the survival horror genre because of the way it was developed and the way it was formatted on that console. But to watch what Capcom was able to do by bringing it into the GameCube hardware with something that, even looking at the game now, I have it running back here on my Switch, for example, it still looks really, really good. And the first thing that really stood out to me that the Resident Evil Remake did so well that a lot of survival horror games either try too hard or struggle to do well at all is Capcom set up a really great level of atmosphere throughout the world. Going through the mansion, just the way Capcom formatted the visuals even, and having, candles flickering on the front of your screen while you're slowly creeping through a room, or just even the way the lighting was designed throughout this world, made the world feel just that much more horrifying and isolating and in a lot of ways almost even depressing, which really was supposed to be the essence of what was going on inside that mansion. And I think that that technological leap wasn't only great for this game, but it was necessary to keep Resident Evil feeling, at the time, relevant and still even now relevant. And looking at the world and the way Capcom has crafted it, in my opinion, this is second to none. Very few survival horror games do it as well as the Resident Evil Remake did, when it came out, and still even currently does it. The other thing that I really liked was playing this. At that time period, I had this like cheap little surround sound setup that I had hooked up to my GameCube. And I was able to, I believe it was like Adobe Digital, I forget, there was a particular name that a lot of the GameCube games advertised. But being able to play this game with that surround sound setup and listening to the sound design was something that only added to that atmosphere. And I've even been playing it now. I've been playing it a bit on my Xbox and on my Switch with headphones, and just listening to all the small little sound details, from the way the footsteps change when you're walking through different foliage, or even hearing the Cerberus dogs crack through the window and hear that cracking start as you're walking through a dark hallway. Those little touches really, really added to that isolating and horrifying feeling that Resident Evil was always trying to do up until that point, but it truly, in my opinion, succeeded with the release of the Resident Evil Remake. And then further to that, we obviously have probably the biggest thing about this game that I think Capcom did so well, and that was the visuals. Of course, the visuals add to the atmosphere, but even the character models feel a lot more realistic. And now, of course, we're comparing GameCube to the PS1 era. Of course, there's going to be that gargantuan leap. But I think that was part of the reason why the PS1 Resident Evil original version, to me, didn't really seem that scary as a kid, because you have these big blocky guys and they just don't really add a human element. Whereas with the remake, Capcom maximized the visuals with the character models, so they felt a lot more human and a lot less cheesy, and as a result, you ended up feeling more connected to this world, and I thought it worked so well. And even playing through this game again, it still holds up that element of having a person alone on their own trying to survive in this horrifying situation. And then to even bring that further, one of the things that I also really appreciated about the remake was Capcom didn't just expand the atmosphere or amplify the atmosphere through better visuals, but Capcom really mastered pacing. In this world, and I would argue that the original Resident Evil also had great pacing as well, but the way they fleshed it out in the remake, the way the world feels almost so lonely, and then there's horrifying events or scary situations where you're walking in a room and a zombie pops out, it really made the game feel almost unexpected if you've never played it before. When I was younger, this was a game that I liked it so much, but I was also scared to play it because I didn't really know what to expect or what was going to happen next. And at that time, the game did truly scare me, and it made me feel like I'm not sure I want to go in this room, or I'm not sure I want to go accomplish this puzzle because I'm worried about what's going to happen next. And it wasn't just a constant shock fest after shock fest. Capcom really used all the elements of this world, as well as its sound design and the visuals, to bring it together to make it feel really special in terms of the pacing. And to be fair, I've probably beaten this game now 20 times. So, of course, I don't get the same shock factor that I did the first handful of times that I played it. But even playing through it now, there's some things that I forgot that even happened in that game that are still scaring me and still have me going, I'm not sure I want to enter this area. And that's something that, to me, is truly special about this entry in the Resident Evil series, and also kicked off a lot of the modern elements and themes that we see in the current Resident Evil entries. And it's impressive to me to even play this game on the Switch or my Xbox and still see how well this game holds up. And I'm aware there's obviously been some quality of life improvements, like better resolutions and upgraded character models and assets, but ultimately the core of what came out of the GameCube to what exists now is in my opinion, incredible. And it's fascinating how Capcom was able to make something to me that feels, even at this point, almost timeless. And that's what I think makes this Resident Evil game truly special, and why it is, in my opinion, my favorite entry in the series.